started out. So that would have been impossible. But what they really did is they went down and they were doing digging. They were doing archaeological work in Jerusalem in particular, and they found a number of different artifacts there. But then the what they discovered in Jerusalem actually led them to Egypt. And so they went to Egypt and they set up their commandery building at the Temple of Isis at Philae. And this is really why they brought back, the image of Isis and Horus that's found at the Temple of Isis at Philae ended up becoming the symbol of Mary and Jesus in the cathedrals in Europe that the Templars were also starting to build. So the Templars, they saw what the Egyptians were doing. They recovered a number of different artifacts, including multiple arks, like the Ark of the Covenant. But they encountered multiple arks, recovered multiple arks. They realized that these were what we would call today a capacitor, but they were a technology from ancient pre-Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians found these things and were preserving them for a long time. The first ark that the Templars recovered was at the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. In fact, there's a chamber at the Temple of Seti I at Abydos that is closed to the public. But if you get a chance to go in there, it actually depicts several arks being undergoing transportation by the Egyptians, and it has Templar graffiti from the 1200s of three red crosses surrounding one of the arks, because that was where they actually found the first ark in Egypt, and then they ended up finding 5 other ones, which are still in Templar possession. But the Templars actually ended up, when they got suppressed in 1307 by the Roman Church, they were suppressed because they were finding all of these texts, like Gnostic texts and other apocryphal texts that didn't fit with the standard Bible, and they were finding other artifacts like these arks and other things, and they weren't turning them over to the Roman Church, and they were setting up relationships with groups that were outside of the Roman Church control. Other religions, other philosophies. They set up good relationships with Islamic scholars and Druze scholars, and Jewish scholars, and they were gaining all this knowledge, and so that the Roman Church suppressed them and said you can't be doing this, because they'd also set up the first multinational corporation. They set up the banking system, that could transcend any one country, because they were trying to break down the control of the monarchies and the Roman Church at the time that controlled everything. So the way to do that was through money, setting up your own financial systems and everything else. So the Templars were doing all this, but eventually they got suppressed for it. The Grand Master got burnt at the stake, and the Templar order had to go underground. And when it went underground, it had to move all these artifacts over to the New World of the Americas, which they knew existed, both from Egyptian records and from Jewish records and from Viking records, all of which they were having they had associations with. And so they moved these artifacts over to the New World, and they had to go underground, and they had to form new bodies to exist in. So one of the bodies that they created, since they were already building the cathedrals, they disguised themselves as stonemasons. And these stonemasons ended up later forming Freemasonry. So Freemasonry really came out of the Templar tradition. And this is why in the higher degrees of Freemasonry, they have Templar degrees. All of the different bodies and rites of Freemasonry, all of their higher degrees are Templar based. And it's because that's where Freemasonry came out of. But there are other Templar lineages that have just continued to exist even after they got suppressed in 1307. They prepared themselves, and they just existed in other territories where they wouldn't get suppressed, like in Portugal and Scotland and in other places. So that's really kind of the relationship between Freemasonry and Templarism. Templars, the Templar lineage I represent is much more. We don't beat around the bush about what our tradition is and where we came from. Freemasonry, they kind of gradually reveal it to you. So,
yeah, that's incredible and powerful. How many incredible artifacts? I mean, where do you think a lot of these artifacts and a lot of this information and knowledge and ancient texts and books they were able to preserve, where do you think a lot of them are now?
Well, I can tell you where they are. They're in 2 different vaults that we have. We used to have 7 vaults, and one of them was actually at Oak Island, but we removed most everything out of Oak Island in 1765. So they're not going to find much there. I hate to tell the people on the show who've been digging for so long. I mean, we have told them, but they're making money off of a show, so.
They've been digging on Oak Island for decades. Decades and decades digging on Oak Island.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. They may find a few coins and stuff, but most of the stuff has already been moved out of there. And it was moved out, to be honest, to a lot of the gold, we had gold candelabras and gold jewelry and coins. A lot of that stuff was all went towards funding the American Revolution, actually. That's why that stuff was removed in 1765. But that said, and Benjamin Franklin was actually largely involved in that process. But that said, we still have 2 vaults right now. They're both on private property that still contain some pretty fantastic things in them, including 6 arcs. And one of the other things we have too that's controversial is clear back in the Middle Ages, we discovered this tomb in East Jerusalem where we discovered these ossuaries, which are boxes that hold bones. And these ossuaries had on them the names of people like Yeshua, Mary of Magdal, Jan, and what we figured out was that these could likely be the bones of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and John the Baptist, and their kids. And when I say their kids, Mary Magdalene was married to John the Baptist first, it appears, and they had children. And then when he was killed, she, as per tradition, she ended up marrying his cousin, who was second in command, which was the person we now know as Jesus. And then they had kids, and eventually, they went off into the world, but they ended up getting buried together back in the family tomb in Jerusalem, which we now know as the Talpiot tomb. And this tomb was again rediscovered back in the 80s. They found the boxes, the ossuary boxes, but they never found the bones that were in them. That's because we took the bones out of it during the Crusades, and these are now in the vaults here in the Americas. We hope to open these boxes soon, or these tombs, these vaults soon, at least one of them, because it's time for it. We now have the technology where we can instantly make this available, and People's minds aren't as conditioned as they used to be, so they're a little more open to this possibility. And we're not trying to invalidate anybody's faith. We're just trying to say there's a little more to it, you know, and but it also implies, you know, a shift in perspective. Like we believe 100% based off of the not only the texts we discovered, but what we'd encountered in the tomb, that these were people who 100% believed in reincarnation, right? And they believed that they died and then they came back. You know, you come back. And being born again was just that. And it wasn't just accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. It was literally being born again. And so that's going to be a shift for a lot of Christians to wrap their heads around.
I was saying the good news is they can't
Yeah, that's right.
in this time and age, but all they can do is just try to make some hate online. It's the worst they can actually do to you. So I love the information. This is incredible information.
Yeah.
It's a lot of confirmation
Well,
for me for a lot of information that I've known for a long time and believed for a long time. It's good to hear it from somebody else. And yeah, that if they can, you know, those vaults, it is now about the right time to start dispensing some of the information to the people, because I think the majority of people are ready. A lot of the people are putting away the dogma and the ideologies and are ready and open for new information to come forward. And maybe you can't release it all at once, but maybe just a little bit at a time to wake people up to a much bigger story, a more broad-ranging story about our past history, not just religiously, but anything else that you guys have been able to acquire, the Templars have been able to acquire and save for prosperity over time. I think that would be absolutely amazing, you know. So just mind-blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's going to be a shift of perception. It's like you've talked about, and I've talked about the fact that the Egyptians had, and in the ancient world, they had all of these arcs. They had multiple arcs,